looked at some twin concordant and discordant studies, identical twin, and I was surprised to see, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was surprised at how heritable obesity was. It was about 0.7. And that's, I mean, when you see heritability of zero point 0.7, that tells you something is very, very genetically predetermined. So even though 100 years ago, virtually none of us were obese, and today, let's just call it your lifetime incidence of obesity is 50%, tells you, and our genes haven't changed in 100 years. So clearly, our susceptibility for obesity has been with us for a great period of time, and it is highly, highly preserved. It's just that in the last, 40, 50 years, we now have matched or mirrored our genes to an environment that is allowing that trait to flourish.
Yeah, the meta-analysis of twin studies that I like to cite these days suggests an average heritability of 75%.
Wow, that's
so
even stronger. Yeah,
it's massive, and there's some debate about that.
Yeah.
I think.
But directionally, this is a really big deal.
It's very heritable, yeah. And a lot of things are very heritable. I think that's one thing we're learning.
People have long wondered why I spend so much time, relatively speaking, talking about genes or the impact of genes on your life. And to that I often want to respond with, I wonder why so few people spend time thinking or talking about genes, given their massive impact on life. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this is because, once again, over the course of several months, I have encountered increasing resistance to even broaching the subject of genes and their impact on human beings. And there are a number of angles I want to approach this from. But for now, just for a point of reference, that conversation was taken from a discussion on Peter Attia's channel. He's a world-famous doctor, does a lot of discussion, talk about longevity. And the gentleman he was talking to is called Stephen Junet, who is basically a PhD specialist in all things related to obesity, fatness, etc., etc. Knows pretty much everything you could know about the neurophysiology, the biochemistry, that kind of thing. And I'm going to start with this particular topic because it really shines a light on various things. Because the fact of the matter is that everything that we have going on in our lives is partly heritable. And some things are very heritable. And furthermore, in case you don't understand this completely, heritability is a variable thing. Heritability itself depends on time, place, and environment. So to most people, heritability just means things that are genetic, things that you've inherited, and that's largely true. But in a technical sense, heritability is basically a statistical measure that measures the proportion of variation in a phenotype or a trait among different individuals in the population that can be solely attributed to those genetic differences. It's a little bit different. So that's what heritability is. And to underscore the point made by these two gentlemen, as you heard Peter Attia state, if you go back 100, 150 years, almost no one is obese, and therefore the heritability of obesity is quite different because the environment is different. Likewise, if you have a strong heritability to become an alcoholic, if you're living on a remote island with access to basically no alcohol, the heritability of alcoholism is 0%. So you basically need an environmental stimulus that will shift the proportion of heritability in a given population. And if you look at the United States specifically, which is the country they're talking about here, the heritability of obesity is very high indeed, of 70 to 75%. And obesity is kind of an easy one, if you actually think about it, to talk about, because it's pretty straightforward. Generally speaking, what leads to obesity is eating too much food. But where the heritability comes into play, there are several factors. The major one is food drive, how much food you want to eat. Some people have very little interest in food, some people have medium interest, and some people do not reach satiety till much later, and so they can eat a lot more. Now, there are other factors, like your basal metabolic rate, which can be highly variable between individuals, also largely genetic, by the way. There are also differences between individuals in terms of how much fat they store versus how many calories they take in. Again, also highly genetic. And the list goes on and on. But the major thing here is food drive. Basically, how much food you want to eat and how much food you're willing to eat until you actually feel satiety, that feeling of fullness. And there's a lot of variation here. Now, it makes sense that huge swaths of the population are very susceptible to this because it was just a survival factor back in the day. And so, of course, you would want to eat as much as possible, because if you didn't, and there was an opportunity to do so, you're not getting those calories in to potentially save for a rainy day, so to speak, when food or calories are not so available. But in a modern obesogenic environment, as the term is used, it has deadly consequences indeed. And I'm bringing this specifically up again because it's an obvious one. There are very good data on this. And on top of that, these days, there are these so-called GLP-1 Ozempic is probably the most popular one, the one you've heard of the most. There's also Wegovy. And these are very specific medications previously no one thought would have been possible. And the basic way these GLP-1 agonists work is that they artificially mimic the secretion of GLP-1, which is basically a hormone that increases your satiety, sending signals to your brain that you are indeed much fuller than you otherwise would be if you didn't take this medication. And essentially what it does is, if you're a person with a high food drive, it mimics the degree of satiety a person with low food drive would have. Essentially, that's what it's doing at the end of the day. And what this is a workaround for a highly genetic issue, because we've spent decades now at this rate talking about the need for movement, and movement doesn't really do all that much in terms of actual burning of calories, as many of you know, because most of the calories you end up burning are for basic processes in the body, and your basal metabolic rate is primarily responsible for that. So, okay, movement, yes, can be a little bit helpful, but it's not going to do that much. But the mantra usually is movement, eating healthy, and eating less. Although usually people just say eating healthy, whatever that means, which is a bit weird because at the end of the day, it is a physics equation, a mathematical equation of calories in and calories out. And there's a lot of controversy around these drugs. And some people have displayed some side effects with respect to these drugs. But I'm bringing this up again because this is an actual solution to what is largely a genetic problem. Your food drive, your desire to consume food, and your degree of satiety is largely genetic, right, in this current obesogenic environment. Now, that could change. And to give another example of variation would be the Korean peninsula, right? You have North Korea and South Korea. After the Korean War, both North and South Koreans were impoverished, malnourished, and they were very short, right? Nowadays, South Korea is a rich country, North Korea is not, and South Koreans are very tall, all things considered. They're much taller than they used to be, much taller than their grandparents were, much taller than their parents were, and significantly taller than the North Koreans, even though, genetically speaking, they're the same population. What happened? Well, the environment changed, it shifted, and therewith shifted the variability, i.e. the heritability of height. So in a place such as South Korea, height is much more heritable than it is in North Korea, because basically the country is rich, and they have plenty of food to eat, and so you're not going to suffer from malnutrition or lack of nutrients. And in North Korea, the counterpart, same population, same people, same genetics overall, the heritability of height is much less stark because of the depressed environment, because they don't get enough to eat, because of malnutrition, because of lack of nutrients, etc., etc. So heritability is variable, but in an environment that very easily contributes to obesity, such as the United States, and not just the United States, many countries in the Middle East, in the South Pacific famously or infamously, and even in Europe, well, the heritability of obesity is very high. And the way you can deal with that is, for example, with these GLP-1 agonist medications, because basically these GLP-1 medications mimic what a person who naturally has a normal or low food drive has, vis-a-vis exogenous administration, of course. And people still don't like this. I'm going to talk a little bit about the mentality behind things. People really don't believe in the power of genes or their influence on us. People get upset when other people employ a GLP-1 agonist to lose weight. I'm not talking about purely cosmetic celebrity types. I'm talking about people who have struggled for years and decades, who've lost weight, gained it back, again and again and again, the yo-yo effect, of course. And they keep on saying things like, you need to put in the hard work, you cheated. Well, let's break this down. There are a couple of things going on here. People, A, don't believe in the power of genes, as I just mentioned, and B, they think if you don't do things a certain way, it's a kind of cheating. Now, people, generally speaking, human apes have a sense of justice, and justice is a separate topic, or perhaps better put, a sense of fairness, what's fair and what's not. Well, I get to say at the outset, if you're born with a naturally low food drive, and you're uninterested in food, that's also unfair. You're not putting in the work not to eat more, you just don't want to eat more because you're naturally disinclined to do so. That's also cheating, right? If you're putting on glasses to help your eyesight, because you otherwise would be farsighted or nearsighted, you're also cheating. Why don't you just put in the hard work? Now, part of this is because at least potentially everyone can lose weight and theoretically keep it off. It's just really, really hard for some individuals to the point of, in some cases, being nigh impossible given certain environmental factors that are going to stimulate the propensity to eat. And so people don't like the notion of cheating, even though everything in life is basically a cheat code depending on your genes. If you're 6'3" and handsome, your entire life is a cheat code, for example. What if you're born hard of hearing and you use a hearing aid to enhance your hearing so you can hear like a normal person? Is that also cheating? Of course it's cheating, but it's also something that we approve of. Now, there's something very pernicious about this view that in certain types of cases, with respect to certain afflictions, people really insist you do things their way or the highway. And so, if you stick your stomach with a GLP-1 agonist, and over many months you actually lose weight and keep it off, due to this injection, you're cheating and you don't deserve it. And this leads to another point I've observed, specifically with respect to obesity. People talk about the health crisis, and there's no doubt that obesity is part of a health crisis and leads to even more health problems down the line, but it doesn't seem like people are very interested in the alleviation of suffering when I hear people getting angry that morbidly obese people are using medication to help mitigate their risk for obesity and to help them achieve a normal weight. They get angry about that, which tells me they don't really care about the suffering of the people at large, but rather they care about doing things a certain way. They care about what they want and not about the suffering and the health consequences, which really goes to show how petty people are, right, at the end of the day. People are really petty, they're really small-minded. So why am I talking so much about this? Well, like I said, obesity is a very useful example because it's a very obvious one. It's been very well researched. There are a lot of good studies on the subject, but it's part of a broader discussion ultimately. Because people really think that we're made of stardust and magic, that genes don't really influence us because we can't see it basically. Humans are still at this stage, even hundreds of years into the scientific revolution, of believing that if you can't see something, it must not be real. So people with different predilections and inclinations due to genes which people cannot see, that's just made up, because everything's the same. And both the right and the left suffer from this malady. The right thinks there's some magic iron will that you can invoke that everyone can achieve, at least in theory, right? And the left thinks everything is some kind of social intervention, and that every outcome in life is largely due to social factors, i.e. environmental factors, with genes playing a very minimal role at best, unless it's related to some very obvious disease. So, for example, many people on the left might be more partial to the notion that obesity is highly heritable, but people on the right would be less so. But on the other hand, the notion that intelligence is highly heritable, people on the left would be very much against that, whereas people on the right would tend to be much more accepting of that proposition because, yeah, different axioms, different ways of viewing the world. The point I'm trying to drive home here ultimately is we're now at a point where we don't need to fear discussion of genes because in some cases, and down the line in the future, there will be many more cases, there will be interventions, if not at the genomic level, interventions related to the outcomes of genes that can help us circumvent a lot of the problems that we face due to our individual genetics. And some people are for that, and some people are against that. But ultimately, if you want to fix problems, you have to look at the root cause of things. And the root cause, more often than not, is the genetic one that is being mediated by the environment. If you create an environment like the US, for example, with fast food chains and cheap processed food that's easily obtainable, well, what do you expect to happen? Now we have the data, we understand how that works. But the same could apply to all manner of things. That's what plastic surgery is all about, right? You're circumventing the misfortune that your parents have bestowed upon you. Hence my running joke, next time, choose better parents. Well, yeah, next time you probably should choose better parents, but until then, there are a lot of workarounds. And ultimately, what we want to do is intervene at the genetic level to make sure people don't have these problems, ideally, because what's better? To inherently have a low appetite and a low food drive in this current environment, or to have to inject a medication that is very cost prohibitive at this stage, very expensive still. These GLP-1 agonists are still quite pricey, and they're not without side effects entirely. Some people have reported issues with the gastrointestinal tract. Some people have even reported issues related to sight. So it's pretty safe, but in general, we just don't know long-term how frequently these side effects will occur. And so it would be better to simply be someone with a very low appetite that just generally has very little interest in food in this environment. Would that be a good trait to have in an environment where you have to hunt and fight every day to survive? No, but that's not the environment we live in anymore. And the same applies to any number of traits: height, intelligence, susceptibility to various diseases. It's time that we change our minds about the power of genes and stop pretending that everything is just magic, that everyone and anyone can do everything. If you actually want to help people, if you actually care about outcomes, health outcomes, life outcomes, then you have to care about genes. You can't keep on pretending that everything is stardust. In the magical environment, with the right education, this will happen. And that if you just work hard enough, you'll become rich and famous, or smarter, or lose weight. No, there's too much at play that's genetic. And that's why I talk about this, because we're now at the precipice of understanding this in great detail and finally being able to offer real solutions to problems that essentially lie outside of our control. Anyway, I do anticipate resistance in the comment section because people still think that genes don't matter, and if they did it, anyone else can do it, depending on what the issue is. But gentlemen, this is our reality and this is our future, whether you like it or not. But, as always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my very generous patrons on Patreon and my donors on PayPal. You guys are the best. Without you, this channel simply could not exist. Thank you so much. And if you can hit the bell icon to be informed of my videos, it would be much appreciated. And the usual YouTube jazz of liking the video, subbing if you're not yet a sub, sharing it, leaving a comment. Allegedly, it helps out the almighty algorithm, so it's much appreciated. If I'm still alive, I'll check you out next time. Until then, may the gods watch over you. Bye-bye for now.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.